Okay, so we're back here. This specific file is called lesson 11 begin, and it's almost identical to the file we left off at. I did just go and I think up the density a tiny bit. That was about it. So what we want to talk about in this lesson is at least introduce the concept of modifiers. Now, the groom is not actually adjusting these primitives. Think of it as the groom is step one. It's taking these, oops, width is still a little high there. There we go. It's taking these guide hairs that we've produced. Then the primitives tab goes ahead, takes those, produces geometry. So, and there's obviously a lot more geometry than there are guide hairs. So what if we want to add randomization to those? For example, there's even been things that haven't been all that easy to produce with the guide hairs. Let's say we wanted randomness in the length, just little bits. Here you can see we have a little bit of regularity. I tried to throw out as much of that as I could by using different things such as noise and repel. But notice there wasn't any random function here. Now inside of noise, you'll also notice there is no random function either for length. So the way we can actually randomize things like length is going to be within our within our modifiers. Now, same thing goes for this attract tab. Remember, this is how we could make those quick little clumps. However, number one, they didn't look great. It was very tedious to get them to look right. Number two, it would take forever to add clumping into the entirety of the fur. And most fur does have a decent amount of clumping to it. Fur is always going to begin to collect oils and dirt and things like that and stick together at least a tiny bit in areas. So for those things, we can take our primitives and using those modifiers, again, add those large scale effects, or I guess small scale effects on a large scale across our mesh. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and shut off my visibility on my groom. Now you'll notice this is starting to get a little tough to see. It looks very kind of noisy. When we get in closer, it's easier to see, but even then it's hard to kind of figure out what's going on here. And this is actually with the smoothing on. You can see without it, it's even worse. What I find works pretty well is actually under the primitives here is turning off tube shade. And you can see it actually gives you a much nicer and actually quicker appearance in the viewport. This may not be the way you ultimately want to render, but it actually looks really nice in the viewport and functions really quickly. And actually later on, you'll see we can even have real-time shadows in our viewport with this. So let's go ahead and throw on our first modifier. Now here's a modifiers tab. In order to add one, there's this little kind of plus button over here. And we have a lot of different modifiers. So we're not going to be able to cover all of these. We will cover some of them. A lot of them you just can kind of play with. However, the big important ones for right now are going to be clumping, the cut, and if I can find it here, the noise. So even if you add these in, let's say by adding cut first, noise first, and then you go ahead and add, where is it? Sorry, I keep losing it, clumping over here. No matter what you do, Maya by default always puts clumping first. Everything else, it will matter what order you kind of assemble it in, but clumping doesn't matter. It's always going to be first. So we'll go ahead and add it first. Anyway, it will be also a nice way to learn to use these modifiers. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in, give it a second, and you'll see these clumps will begin to appear. Now, normally it's not going to be this simple. The reason this happened, and I didn't actually intend for this, is that I had already tested the clumps way earlier in the process just to see how they looked, and it created a clump map for me, and I really should have deleted that. I'm going to go ahead and remove this from here, and let me show you how to delete that clump map. What you need to do is get your project file. I have that right over here. Go here to XGen, Collections. Here's our Bigfoot collection. There's the fur. And you're going to see that the paint maps, there's the maps we've been working on. However, there's also this clumping map that was created. We'll just go ahead and delete that. There we go. And we should be good to go. Notice it hasn't changed here. We just need to refresh it. There we go. So now when I go ahead and add clumping, it's going to give us an error, and that's normal. It'd be nice if it actually told us, hey, you need to go do this and this, but it doesn't. What we have to do is before we make any changes to our clumping, we need to come down over here to set up maps. we have to tell it where those clumps are going to exist. I'm going to go ahead and clear those out so it's easier to see. So to do this, we have to come here and hit generate. And it shows us how many clumps we're going to have. Everywhere you have one of these little yellow lines, you have a clump. You want more, up your density. Hit generate, we have more. You want less, obviously smaller number. Now, you could also make these based on the guide hairs. So if I click that and then go ahead and hit save, it's going to make a clump for every guide hair. Now we have an enormous amount of guide hairs. That's not really a great idea. So I'm going to choose the generate mode. And I want to do this kind of in multi-stages. I want to have actually two separate type of clumps. So let's make this one just kind of very large scale. We'll do maybe 0.7. So just those clumps there. And let's go ahead and hit save. There we go. And you can see now the clumps form. And the clumps are exactly what they sound like. It actually clumps our fur. Now there are quite a few controls for this. Go ahead and come up over here. The first one is our mask, and don't be kind of put off by that. It's not like we're masking out an area. Think of this just like your overall effect. If I put this to 0.1, you can see it puts it to almost nothing as opposed to something like 0.5. We get just a little bit of clumping. Okay. Now you could put a map in here, over here, and decide exactly where you want clumps and where you don't as well. Go ahead and put that back to full. Now the actual clump effect can be adjusted over here. You can see it works very similar to the one above. The difference is this one can be painted and kind of, it should be your main clump setting, if you will. Okay. You can also see I have the ability to adjust how tight the clump is all the way from the root to the tip. So if I want to maybe open that clump up a little bit so it doesn't come in as tight, I can do that. You can see we have much looser clumps right now. I'm going to go ahead and make that tighter just so it's a little easier to see while we continue working. There we go. We'll also go ahead and make those a bit tighter as well. And I'll change this a little bit later. Okay. We can also turn on clump volumization, which I'm not 100% sure exactly what it does. It does seem to flatten the clumps out and almost kind of preserve, I guess, volume in some way based on the normals and the face density. I can't be 100% sure if that's exactly what it does, though. It's a little bit confusing to me, especially in these areas here where it tends to kind of flatten things down strangely. There we go. So we can also change the variance of the clumps. Think of this almost like randomization. There we go. And then we have effects. So the first thing is the copy of, actually, this is just going to duplicate the clumps, but I usually don't use this, but we can go ahead and up it. We'll go ahead and put our copy effect to 5. Now let's go ahead and increase the copy effect at the root. So it's basically going to put a clump over the clump. We don't really see that right now. Let's try a clump variance of like 7. It's actually a little hard to see. It's kind of almost like, creating artificial hairs in there, just more of them. There we go. Go ahead and just keep that off for now. It's not one I usually use. If I want more hairs, I typically just make more hairs. Maybe I'm misunderstanding it, but anyway, next we have the cut effect. Now this is going to randomly cut down the lengths of the clumps. So I can put this to maybe 0.5, and you can see how it starts to shorten certain clumps. I don't really like this effect here. The cut effect is great when added separately, though. We're going to go ahead and turn that off. I want the clumps to keep their current length. We can, of course, add noise. So let's put this to maybe like 0.6. And you're going to see almost no effect. Now we do have to go ahead and, of course, raise the amount of noise. But even then, it looks like we just have like this general shift a little bit there. You can adjust the frequency. You can correlate as well, so they kind of match noise. However, the main reason we're not seeing much of that noise is because there's not enough detail in our primitives. So we're going to go ahead and maybe up this count to like 15. And you can see now we've gained a little bit more resolution, if you want to call it that. And now we can go ahead and say that maybe there's actually more noise at the tip of the hair, right there. Maybe up our frequency, and you can see we start to get quite a bit of noise coming through those. So we'll go ahead and I'm going to take it completely off of the root there, And actually, I don't want nearly that much on the tip. I just want maybe a tiny bit of noise right there. Okay. And we're not going to use any offset. We also have some flatness effect, which will flatten the clumps down, which actually is a nice effect. So it doesn't keep them as tube shaped. So you can see it just kind of flattens those down just a bit. And I would probably, again, want this more at the tip and less so at the root. Oops. Delete that there. Go. And then the final effect is the curl. So we can go ahead and add a bit of curl. And it looks like we need to maybe turn that up a little bit higher. There we go. We get a little bit of curl to those. Now you can see it kind of twists along the end. So that's basically how these clumps work. So in the next lesson, let's go ahead and actually fine tune this so it doesn't look like a horror show. And we'll also look at adding a secondary level of clumps. See you guys there.